All right. Okay. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome back for all those returning from yesterday. And if you are just joining us, welcome to day 2 of the Decolonizing Therapy training series. Today's session will be a deep dive into the therapy cards with Dr. Evan, and I am so excited. If you don't know, I am Erica Blackwood. I am the SADI specialist at NC Casa. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And before we get started, before I pass it over to Dr. Ebony, just a few housekeeping items. I welcome you all to interact throughout the chat. These sessions are meant to be very interactive. So if you can turn on your cameras, that'd be great. But if not, we do understand. This is our space. So over the next few days, this is a space where you should be doing all you can to take care of yourself, including taking breaks, stepping away from the computer as needed, or whatever it is. Collective trauma continues to be a part of all of our lives, and your well-being is paramount as we move through this series. So do what your body tells you is right. Certificates will be available. And at the conclusion, you will receive a link for an evaluation survey. You will not be able to receive a certificate without completing the evaluation survey. Feel free to attend as many or as few of these as you like, but only those who have attended the entire, all 3 sessions will receive a certificate stating such. If you choose to move through the entire series, you'll receive a certificate for completion, and you will also receive a package for your agency with the products that Dr. Ebony will be discussing today and tomorrow. Participation, again, is strongly encouraged. I want to make sure that we are all taking advantage of the time that we have with the lovely, knowledgeable Dr. Ebony. So make sure you are as engaged as your mental space will provide. So ask all the questions, blow up the chat, and also feel free to use your voice. If anybody knows me knows I love to hear your voice in the space. So you can do that by unmuting yourself and engaging in the conversation. And so now with that being said, I will now turn it over to Dr. Ebony. Dr. Ebony, I see we have a few new people. So if you'd like to kind of introduce yourself and dive right in.
Perfect. Thank you, Erica. Good afternoon, y'all. And thank y'all for those who were here yesterday for returning, and the new faces. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Dr. Ebony. I'm a licensed psychologist here in Texas, and I'm based out of Austin. My practice largely centers around trauma recovery, helping Black women and other women of color regain their voices that trauma takes from them, helping us learn how to advocate for ourselves, ask for what we want and need, learn how to communicate in our relationships so that we can have sustainable, healthy relationships, and learning how just to communicate so that we can ensure the likelihood that we'll get what we want from the people that we are in relationship with. Always not a guarantee, but at least that we're practicing using our voices to be able to communicate and understand that we deserve to ask for what we want and need inside of the spaces that we occupy. So that's a large part of the work. There's some self-esteem stuff that goes on, self-care, all of that stuff, of course. And most of the work that we do has centered around interpersonal trauma, which is trauma that has happened at the hands of somebody else, like childhood abuse, domestic violence, betrayal trauma inside of relationships, friendships, that kind of thing. And we've, of course, moved into tackling more race-based trauma, so microaggressions in the workplace, sort of racism in the workplace. I live in Austin, where a lot of the tech companies have hubs here, and a lot of Black women are working in those companies and experiencing a lot of racism. So we're working through that too. Many of us have been experienced trauma growing up by way of just tragedy, trauma, you name it, just being born into this world we have generational trauma that exists within our bodies. And so you show up to work and you also are experiencing trauma in your workplace based on how you look, based on the color of your skin and that kind of thing. And it makes it difficult to do the job that you were hired to do. And so we're working through that, learning how to advocate in those spaces as well. On top of being a psychologist, I'm also a food relationship strategist where I help people understand the anti-Black roots of diet culture and provide a lot of education around how diet culture began, how diet culture has transformed the way we engage with food, has taken away our abilities to learn how to feed ourselves, taken away our innate abilities to feed ourselves and to know what our body is asking for, basically disconnected our sort of sense of fulfillment, satisfaction, hunger, and relying on messages rooted in diet culture, like eat everything on your plate, or people are gonna starve, or you can't eat that because that's gonna make you fat, or you're gonna die. So learning how to inherently and innately show up with food again from a place of confidence and empowerment versus the fear mongering that happens in diet culture. When people hear that I'm a food relationship strategist, automatically they go, oh, she's gonna tell us how to eat. And that's a testament to just how conditioned we are around having people tell us how to eat, that we don't even know that we have the innate ability to eat on our own and for our bodies to be healthy without following some diet or following what somebody says is the new best thing to try, but learning how to feel that out for yourself. Most of diet culture is rooted in scarcity mindset. And for those of us who grew up in poverty, who grew up in food deserts, that kind of thing, all diet culture does is trigger those things that are in us from how we grew up. And we wonder why we can't stick to a program. It's not that you can't stick to it most times, it's that is triggering and it reminds you of how you grew up. It's scarcity mindset activated. So I teach a lot of women how to show up with more abundance and comfort and trusting yourself again to choose the foods that are going to nourish you, to choose the foods that you enjoy, and to release the guilt from yourself. So that's primarily what that work looks like. I'm also the creator of my therapy cards that we're going to dive into today. And I'll tell you how they got started, but it's the first exploration card deck that's a mental health tool that's specifically created for Black women, Black men, and Black teens to provide representation of us in the mental health space, a space that we've often not been welcomed in or often been criminalized in. And so we're taking the initiative to address stigma that exists as well, and we'll talk more about that. And I'll dive into how this thing has grown and what it is now and how you can use it for yourself and how you can use it with the people that you're working with. I do, like Erica said, prefer that y'all engage right now, like on the spot. Don't save your questions to the end unless you just absolutely feel like you have to or want to. But engage with me, ask questions, stop me, take yourself off mute, ask your question. I really do believe that this is our space, and I encourage you to use your voice to say, hey, I don't understand that. Could you explain that? Or, oh, that question makes sense, whatever. And you can do it in the chat. I was telling people yesterday that I'm from the Instagram platform where I'm going live and people are engaging in real time. So that feels very formal. That feels very normal to me. And I like to release the formalities of it and let's have a conversation. We're in community together. So I want us to feel like that and feel like you are just as much a part of this space as I am here talking to you. So without like providing any more details about the cards, I'm going to go into sharing my screen so that we can take a look at the cards together and kind of talk about how we got here, what's going on, and where we are going from here, and how you can actually start to use the cards in real time. There we go. Okay. And I'll be checking the chat. I get a little chat box that pops up, so I'll be checking it to make sure. So y'all just feel free to go right ahead to ask your questions. So we'll talk about why we're here, and I like to let people know what to expect from today's talk, just so you'll have an idea of what's to come. We're going to talk about why the cards are created, the framework that I use to create the card, and we're specifically going to dive into the mindset category today, and we'll go into the habits, but we won't finish up the habits just because of time, but I will introduce them and we'll finish up habits and triggers tomorrow, and then you'll know what I'm talking about when I talk about habits, triggers, mindset. I'm going to tell you and provide you some information about how to ask follow-up questions on the cards, and then we're going to do a group exercise where we're going to work through the cards together, and then we're going to have a Q&A, and then I have some work for you to do at home or in between session from now till tomorrow. So we're here because when I first moved to Austin, I am a psychologist, so a PhD level therapist. When I moved here, I was the only Black psychologist in the city. And I didn't know that moving here. I moved to Austin to work for the fire department. I was actually one of two psychologists who worked with firefighters and EMS. And so I literally, and I like to be transparent with y'all because who you see is who I am. I only started private practice because I wanted to not touch my money that I was getting from my full-time job. And I'm an avid traveler. I love to travel. It's how I center myself. It's how I keep myself sane. I love to try different foods and just eat and drink throughout the world. I just love it. And so I was like, okay, well, I don't want to touch my my full-time job money. I want to open up a private practice so I can have some travel money. And I literally opened up the private practice. And that's when I found out that I was the only Black woman psychologist practicing in the city. We have other master's level clinicians, but I was the only PhD level therapist here. And I was like, oh my God, this is horrible. So when I opened my practice in 2019 and I saw my first client, I was only supposed to see like 3 people on the weekends. That's literally what it was supposed to be. And before the summertime, I basically had a full-time load of people wanting to come in and do therapy. But I didn't have the capacity to see everybody because I had a full-time job. So I had to refer people out or I had to tell people no. And I was like, this doesn't feel real good. If I have a wait list that's extensive. And I don't like people just sitting on a wait list when they've reached out. When you reached out for help, you clearly are ready to start right then. So that kind of sat with me and that kind of weighed on me. And so I had this idea. Actually, the card deck actually started out, it was supposed to be the food relationship deck first. But then when I saw the need for therapy, I said, you know what? Let me rework this frame. Let me rework this business plan. Let me rework what I want to do. And let me prioritize what I see a need for. And the need was therapy. A lot more people, we talk about in the Black community, the Black and brown communities, like we need to be more open to therapy, and people are coming around to therapy. And when they come around, they just don't have the resources or they can't get in with people. So I was like, let me figure out what to do. And that's how we got here. The idea morphed from, we're not going to do a food relationship deck. We're going to do a therapy card deck. I don't know how that's going to happen, but we're going to do a therapy card deck. And so we're here to talk about how that sort of came to life and what that looks like. Before we go into that, I want to provide you some stats. Yesterday, we spent a lot of time talking about grief. We spent a lot of time talking about issues that we all are experiencing for the most part from the pandemic, stress, loneliness, the grief of what life used to be, needing to kind of like adjust to the transitions that are happening around us. And so here's some more information to pair with what we shared yesterday. In general, Black adults are 20% more likely to experience serious mental health problems such as major depressive disorder or generalized anxiety. Yesterday, I shared in 2019, 1 in 10 people had said that they had experienced depression or anxiety symptoms. By June of 2020, months into the pandemic, that was 1 in 3 people. And so when we're talking about Black adults in 2019, this isn't even to pandemic level stats yet, but 20% of Black adults were experiencing mental health problems. And the systemic social inequities and discrimination exacerbates the stress and other mental health issues that we experience. So if we have sleep issues, if we have depressive symptoms, or if we have anxiety symptoms or stress that we just carry in our bodies just generationally, the persistent social inequities, the persistent race-based discrimination, the persistent workplace harassment or microaggression is going to exacerbate what we feel. So we could be carrying stress in our bodies and try to figure out, why does this feel so heavy to me? Because it's compounding. You're experiencing compounded complex stress responses. Black and Hispanic children, as we're talking about adults and now we're talking about children, are 14% less likely to then receive treatment for depressive symptoms. So you got this great amount of stress that lives in our bodies, the amount of things that are passed down intergenerationally. And then we have this large percentage of children who don't either have access to it or who are not receiving the treatment for whatever means, access, cost, stigma, geographical limitations, what have you. And when people are repeatedly exposed to violence or race-based discrimination, their risk for PTSD increases. And we see that for youth, this is increasing in 25% of Black youth. That number is either 25% or higher for Black adults. And after the pandemic, we're going to see that number increase even more. The rate of PTSD in our population prior to the pandemic was low. It was probably around, I know we hear PTSD a lot, it was around 17 to 20%. That number is going to skyrocket to about 38, 45% of people experiencing PTSD because of the repeated exposure, because of the trauma that lives in our bodies, because of the lack of coping skills and lack of access, the social isolation. Those things significantly increase your risk for developing severe symptoms related to depression, PTSD, stress, anxiety, insomnia, chronic pain. So think about us all being in isolation for the past 2.5 years, or really between 2020 and 2021. Severe isolation, not able to go anywhere, threat of death or threat of sickness, and then needing help for the things that were brewing in your body and in your mind. Not having access to that because we were all social distancing or what have you, or isolating and quarantining. That stuff people have to learn how to deal with it. And people usually learn how to deal with it by suppressing. So as we're coming back outside, as people say, and as we are trying to find what normal looks like, a lot of this stuff is going to continue to reveal itself for folks and continue to create problems. So we'll be seeing issues stemming from the pandemic for years to come in our children and in ourselves and adults. So if you think about even the things that we're seeing in schools, we're seeing more children die by suicide. We're seeing more adults die by suicide. And it's not a matter, I remember growing up thinking that suicide was a white people's issue, and it's not. It's our issue. We just are underrepresented, underserved, and the rates are underreported. So it's happening, and it's happening for youth so much more. And think about adults. We've spanned a lifetime of learning how to be resilient. We've learned coping skills to go along, throughout our lives. We've picked up things here and there. We've learned how to cope with things. We've learned how to, work through some things. Whether we worked with a therapist or not, we learned how through survival. And you can talk about even 30 plus years, right? So we're over 30. We at least have 20 years where we're like, oh, okay, some of us more. Okay, I'm gonna learn how to figure this thing out. You have youth who are 13, 12, 11, 15. They don't have that many years of experience to learn how to deal with what's going on in their bodies, and they're having to carry as much, if not more, than what we're carrying. And so that creates a lot of stress and angst and pain for our youth and for ourselves, because then the adults in their lives also don't know what to do because they're dealing with their stuff. So here we are all in this just web of stress and mental health issues where we're all just trying to work it out. Okay. And not to mention the stigma associated with mental health. It is a significant factor that impacts and discourages more than 80% of Black Americans from seeking help for whatever reason, right? Historically, the mental health field, and I like to provide this information because people either don't know or it may be a review for some other people. The mental health field is based out of the medical model. The medical model, if we think about the medical model and how it's treated Black and brown folks, hasn't always been a space where we felt welcomed or that we even had access to. If we go back to doctors' offices and the segregation where whites were allowed to enter through the front, Blacks were going through the back, think about access to care and think about how that, in your own mind, if that was a thing today, how likely would you be to show up to a therapist's office with that kind of segregation, that kind of field, that kind of environment? We probably would not want to. Also, if we go back even further, the medical model, the medical field and the medical model really saw Black and brown folks as faulty, just inherently flawed, inherently bad, right? And so a lot of the things that we're presenting with were attributed to us being Black. And also we were more criminalized than any other person inside of these systems. So if you have grandparents, great-grandparents who experienced this, and families being torn apart because people were sent to asylums or sent to prison because of some mental health issue that they just couldn't rectify, then that message is going to be passed down through families that we don't do that. You don't go talk to anybody. It's from a place of protection to keep the family together. So when we talk about people not wanting to go to therapy now, we have to be understanding that, yes, we need to be doing more to get into therapy, but we also have to be honest with folks that I can invalidate their experience. I can see why you wouldn't want to engage with a field that has often criminalized you, that has often overdiagnosed you, that has often made people who look like you feel unwelcomed in this space. So we have to validate that, and people aren't just not receiving therapy because they don't want to. It's very scary. I even hear today people saying, I don't want to go to therapy because when I told my therapist that I had a thought of suicide, I was admitted into an inpatient program, or I was taken to the hospital, just by mere fact of just saying I have these thoughts, not digging any further, not asking any follow-up questions. I was immediately sent to inpatient, and I would never go back to a therapist again. So that's the same thing that happened years ago, where people were automatically sent off to asylums, sent off into isolation without people trying to understand where they were coming from. So people still have an apprehension, they still have a stigma around receiving help and going to seek help. The first, one of the first projects or introductions of talk therapy to the Black community was the Harlem Project in the 1940s. This project was how to get Black people, especially Black youth, more mental health services. And this wasn't to get them more mental health services because they needed it, because of the trauma that they've experienced just historically. It was, how do we get them the help that they need so that they don't turn into criminals? And so if you think about this type of development of this field, people generally and genuinely have an apprehensive nature or skepticism about them when it comes to talking to therapists. And we haven't always been out in the forefront. Social media helps us to be more present. It helps people to see us as more human, and I do love it for that. However, most people have only seen through television, through media, what a therapist looks like. And that's been a white person, typically a white male or female. And so you have these depictions of what therapists look like. And so people are like, well, that doesn't look like me. I don't think they're going to be able to help me. And therefore, I'm not going to go. We also have the factor of religion and faith, where people are more reliant on faith and religion and not being able to see that you can pair therapy and faith together to be able to get the help that you need. So a lot of people are scared because of that, because they fear that it means that they are not faithful enough, and that means that they don't have the best relationship with God and that kind of thing, and that keeps them out of therapy too. So we just have to be understanding when we're working with our clients, and also when we're trying to find compassion for ourselves, is that we're not just not going to therapy. We have all these historical things that are happening for us. And one of the things that I share on social media is that we also are apprehensive about going to therapy too, because things change once you go to therapy. What you knew to be true for yourself now may change, or it may not change. That's relationships. So the more you heal, you might start to see people differently, and your relationships may unravel because of the healing that you're doing. And that's super scary for folks. So folks just don't want to deal with the unknown. Also, there's a lack of cultural understanding by some providers, which leads to overdiagnosing and misdiagnosing schizophrenia, ADHD. So not taking into account that some Black and brown folks are actually experiencing PTSD, but we're diagnosing and misdiagnosing as ADHD, or we're misdiagnosing it as schizophrenia, when people literally are having trauma responses. Lack of access to quality healthcare, health insurance, and not being able to just find providers who look like you or who are culturally responsive. I share through my social media that many people are wondering, why don't therapists accept insurance? Insurance serves as a huge barrier in a lot of cases as to why people aren't, able to get the services that they need. While it's helpful and, it has some benefit for funding your health care, when it comes to mental health, insurance companies have the ability to say, oh, your area is oversaturated with therapists, we're not going to panel you. So I can be a new graduate Black therapist, and they're going to say, oh, it's already too many therapists out there doing what you do. We don't need you on this panel because of oversaturation. Yes, there are therapists, but how many therapists are there that look like me to serve the community that exists? And so some insurance companies are not paneling providers who actually want to be paneled, and people are stuck not being able to find people who look like them if that's their choice and preference. Also, insurance companies struggle with paying therapists on time, or even paying them what they're worth, commensurate to what they would actually get if they were accepting self-pay. Okay. And so you have some therapists struggling between how do I create a quality of life for myself, but also serve people and help them with their mental health needs. So we have a lot of these factors that are impacting our ability to get help, heal, and do the work we need to do to achieve our highest selves or to flow into our higher selves. And a lot of these factors are something I want us to keep in mind as we are talking to our clients, or even as we're thinking about the help that we need for ourselves. You'll find that a lot of therapists are now moving towards not accepting insurance. And these are a lot of the reasons, which is going to make access a lot harder, which is going to make cost and covering costs a lot more difficult for folks. But it's because insurance companies aren't doing their part to actually take care of the providers who are on their panels. And I'm happy to answer any more questions about that. So as I started in 2019, I noticed that my caseload was more than what I could actually handle, and my capacity to see everybody who wanted to come in was not there. Also in 2019, well, before 2019, up until like 2020, when the pandemic hit, my social media was continuing to grow and people were continuing to find therapists, and people were using the social media platform to learn more about mental health. So a lot of therapists are occupying the social media space, providing information, disseminating tips, giving people work that they could do, downloadables, that kind of thing. And so I was also doing the same thing. The thing that happens with social media, though, is that you are pushed out and anybody over the entire world can see you and they may want to work with you. Due to laws, due to ethics, we can only see people in the areas that we're licensed. So if I'm licensed in Texas and California, I can only see people who are residents of Texas and California. So you're in New Jersey, you're in North Carolina, and you run across my page and you're like, oh, that speaks right to the issue that I'm experiencing. I'm going to email her. I want to come in and see her now. And then you only, email me only to get, oh, I can only work with people who live in Texas. You're like, well, dang, that doesn't fit. And so it can discourage you from seeking more help, and it can discourage you from going any further if you're continuously reaching out to providers and continuously hearing no. So that was one of the things I said, I got to do something about this access issue. And I want to do something about it. So I, as any other person creative trying to figure out how to disseminate information, I'm like, do I do an ebook? Do I do a book? Do I write a book? What do I do? And so the card deck idea came, and I was like, well, you know what? I won't do the full relationship deck. We'll make a card deck. That way people can feel like they're talking to me without actually talking to me. And so that's how I kind of gelled it all together and created the cards from a place of needing to address the access. Then we move on to the issue of cost. And I said, well, I'm asking people, just in full transparency, I can tell you on my rates, I'm asking people to pay $175 an hour to see me. It started out as 120 and it has gone up since then, but I'm asking people to pay $150 to see me. Everybody doesn't have that to pay. People are having to be turned away because they can't afford help. That's not okay. So what can I do, again, to create something that's a little bit more cost efficient for folks and they can get quality help? So we address cost, we address access, right? And then I named it my therapy cards on purpose because, as I told you, the historical information, I wanted us to feel like we could take up space in this field. So I called it my on purpose, my therapy, because I want us as Black and brown folks to get used to saying my therapy. This is my space just as much as it's anybody else's, and I deserve to get the help and healing that I deserve or need. So I wanted to tackle fear. I wanted to tackle skepticism. I wanted to tackle apprehension. And it just all seemed to come together at that time in late 2019. I was like, oh, this makes so much sense. I don't know why we haven't done this yet. And so we created the cards to address those things. And here we are today. Also, I wanted to put it in a way that people would access it. I know everybody's doing an ebook. I know everybody is writing books. And I was just like, what do we like to do? We like cards. And so I was like, we're going to put it in a card deck. We're going to make this a lot more approachable. And we're going to make this a lot more fun to engage with versus, feeling like we need to sit down and be all serious, that we can really have these deep conversations over something that we're mostly familiar with, which is cards. So as I came up with the idea of, okay, we're going to put all of the questions that I ask my clients in regular everyday session, I'm going to put them in the card deck. So people can feel like, hey, I can't work with Dr. Ebony, but this is a question that a therapist would ask me. This is a question that Dr. Ebony will ask me. This is a question that I've heard my own therapist friends say they ask their clients. So this feels like legit clinical work. And I wanted people to feel that. And I love affirmation cards. I think they are a great pairing to my therapy cards. I love intention cards. I love quotes that people can get on cards to help them rethink or reframe the way that they're thinking. But I wanted this particular resource to be something that helped people dig deeper. And so that is what I wanted. That is why I included the questions that I have inside of the cards. I didn't want to create a trauma deck right off, because as you probably can guess, working with folks who've experienced complex histories of trauma, you can get into some liability territory if folks are triggered too much and don't have the resources to pull themselves out of whatever they're triggered with. So we started the first creation with general questions that people could answer and that would take them deep enough, but not too deep where they couldn't come back from it. So we categorize the cards into 3 categories, and that's your mindset, your habits, and your triggers. So when I'm working with folks inside of therapy, and you probably can think about the regular CBT model, right? The cognitive behavior model, where you're like, something happens and then you think something and then you feel something. What I feel like keeps us out of being able to keep ourselves from being stuck, being able to have momentum and keep going forward, is a lot of those thoughts and behavioral patterns that we typically talk to clients about, but I wanted to dive deeper into them. And I know that a lot of times we hear, oh, it's a mindset thing. And we know as clinicians or people who typically work inside of spaces where we're providing a service to folks that is dealing with mental health stuff, we understand that there are beliefs and thoughts that come up that typically get in people's way. So I built on that particular framework to be able to create the categories and frameworks specifically used for the cards. So mindset is addressing those mental processes that present themselves in the forms of thoughts, our beliefs, our judgments, and our attitudes. And I specifically wanted to include beliefs, judgments, and attitudes. And I wanted to go beyond what are you thinking, what are your thoughts? Because from my own experience in therapy, I don't think people understand that their judgments about themselves and their attitudes are rooted in the things that they think, or may be persuaded or sort of created out of the things that they believe, their belief systems that we have been sort of ingrained or exposed to. Those particular things tend to create our belief system, create our attitudes about certain things. And when I say certain things, I mean like our attitudes towards marriage, our attitude towards relationship, our beliefs about sex, our beliefs about healing, our beliefs about forgiveness. All of this is rooted in a lot of the systems that we've been exposed to or indoctrinated by. Then I wanted to think about habits. What are those regular patterns that we find ourselves doing that is continuously getting in our way? I specifically wanted to bring habits into this framework because I think in a lot of the other framework that we see clinically, we see something happens, you believe something, you feel something, right? Or you think something, you feel something. I wanted us to take a look at how am I showing up in the dynamic that is happening in my life? What is it that I am doing to help either further the stuckness that I'm experiencing or further the healing that I'm experiencing? I think it's really important when we're working with people in our work, especially people who have experienced histories of trauma, sexual trauma, to talk about the power that we actually have. A lot of times, trauma survivors are spending time thinking about what's happened to them and how things are their fault, and not enough time talking about, oh, I did that for myself. I actually am able to take care of myself. So I wanted us to also not only think about the role that we have in the way things are happening around us and to us, but also paying attention to the things that we're doing well, because that creates more feelings of empowerment. That creates more of an opportunity for us to feel like we can get ourselves out of where we are and we can continue to be motivated to create the change that we're looking for. And also triggers. One of the things that I found working with people around food relationship issues is people will always tell me, girl, I was doing so well and then the weekend happened. Or I was doing so good and then the family reunion happened. Or I was doing so well, but then I had somebody pass in my family. And we'll hear this too with the pandemic. Oh my God, I was doing these things. I felt healthy. I was taking care of myself. I was listening to my body. Then the pandemic hit. When things hit us, those are called triggers. And a lot of us don't have a variety of coping skills to turn to be able to address those triggers or resolve those triggers when they come up. So I specifically wanted to create questions and put questions in the deck that got people to think about, how am I responding? What are my emotional responses looking like? Do I have the coping skills I need to handle this shame that's coming up, this guilt that's coming up? So how am I responding to situations and stressors? Okay, and let me know if there's any questions right now. So I really wholeheartedly believe that our path to change and gaining more insight is through addressing our mindset, paying attention to our habits, and understanding our triggers. So in the mindset category, these cards are specifically driven to address the mental blocks that exist, our problematic thought patterns, how to work through old antiquated beliefs, because some of us, like I talked about yesterday, are still holding on to beliefs that we know logically we don't believe. One of them that came up yesterday as we were talking about food relationship stuff is I was told I have to eat everything on my plate or people in Africa are going to starve, or I should just be grateful for having food because other people don't have food and I'm just taking food out of other people's mouths, or issues around money or issues around being in relationships. So one of the things that I was also taught was, if you don't clean your house yourself, you're not going to get a good partner, specifically a husband. Nobody, you're not going to make a good wife. So all of these beliefs exist for us and we continuously pass them down, even though we logically, if we stop and think about it, know that there is no logical basis to them, right? And so when we don't slow down and we're just operating in survival mode, though, we continuously operate on the belief systems that have been there, even if we don't agree with them, and we'll pass those down and we'll continue to function out of those places. So the mindset category serves to bring those to awareness so that we can begin to work through them. Also, the irrational beliefs that we have, self-limiting thoughts and attitudes, and faulty core beliefs. Also addressing some of the things that we've internalized from our belief system, learning how to reframe those thoughts and beliefs and exploring our own narrative. What are we telling ourselves about who we are? What's our story about ourselves? Who do you tell people you are? When people ask you something or people say something, you're like, girl, whatever. One of my narratives, one of my lines in my narratives that I'm from Mississippi. I said that so many times yesterday. Like, I'm from Mississippi because being from Mississippi has shaped a lot of the ways I interact with the world. Being from the South has shaped a lot of ways that I understand womanhood, that I understand relationships, that I understand just who I am. All of those things are not true, or they don't serve me, but they have definitely shaped who I am. They shaped my relationship with food. So that is a line in my narrative. So the cards help us to explore, what have we been telling ourselves about who we are, and does that line in your narrative actually serve you? Okay. When it comes to habits, we're addressing problematic behaviors. We're addressing the repetitive, ineffective thought patterns that come up. What are those things that are playing on replay? Nobody likes me. People are going to think that I'm stupid. People are going to think I don't know what I'm talking about. People are going to think that they're going to find me out. They're going to think that I'm a fraud. People are going to know that I am not as smart as they think I am, or people are not going to like me if I don't say yes to things. What are those repetitive thoughts that we have? What are those maladaptive coping skills that once served a purpose for you in your life to help you survive, but are no longer helping you, yet you're still doing it? What are the things that we're doing to break the patterns? What does that look like? Can you recall a time where you broke a pattern, and how was that? What did your life look like? Can we regain those skills, call into awareness those skills to be able to do that again to help us get unstuck? The habit cards are meant to disrupt autopilot behaviors. Yesterday, we talked about survival mode, and many of us are just operating off of what we know. Many of us are connected to our heads and more not connected to our bodies. And so we're operating from a cognitive place, not a free-flowing space of what is our body telling us to do, what is our mind telling us to do, what's going on from a grounded place, but we're just on autopilot, right? And one of the things that we typically do on autopilot is, I know I do it, is I drink coffee. And Sometimes coffee does absolutely nothing for me, and sometimes it does too much. However, it's a routine and it's a habit that I continue to gravitate towards, even when it causes me problems. So, how do I disrupt that behavior when I know it's causing me problems with sleep or irritability, or when I'm experiencing high anxiety? How do I not drink coffee that's going to exacerbate that anxiety, right? Solidifying effective habits, addressing your role, installing the change, and how do we establish patterns of self-care? Also, how do we pay attention to those habits that you've created that actually help you? And how do we get more of those sort of in part or to become a part of your routine and lifestyle? The trigger cards are created to address and to help you understand, what are my triggers? How am I responding? How have I been managing my life? Is this adaptive? Is this serving me? We also want to disrupt the responses that no longer serve your highest good. If you're in a relationship and you've been given feedback that someone doesn't like to be hung up on, but when you're upset, you hang up on them. How is that serving you? What is that response about? How did that one serve you? Did it help you out before? Sustainability wise, is that going to be something or behavior or response when you're triggered that is going to be helpful in you sustaining a long-term relationship? Or some of the things that come up in therapy for folks is, when I need a connection, when I feel like I am wanting human connection, I might retreat towards talking to my ex, who I know means me no good. And so I'm triggered around loneliness. Loneliness, although it's a feeling, it's an emotion, it's a state of being, it triggers me to get back in contact with that ex, or it triggers me to put myself back in situations where I could be harmed. And so these are conversations we can have with our clients and ourselves around, what are we doing in response to particular emotions. Around holidays, I tend to start missing certain folks, or around season change, I start to kind of shut down, or I might start engaging in behaviors that I might not particularly be happy about. Or I notice that when the seasons change, I'm actually more aware of myself and I'm doing more to help myself. So it can go both ways. We want to use these cards to reconnect to our minds and our bodies. There are cards in the trigger categories that ask us, how do you feel in your body when that happens? One of the reasons for that is because trauma comes in typically and disrupts our ability to listen to our bodies, and we're completely in survival mode. So we want to slow things down for folks, and we'll get more into this tomorrow, that allows them to sit and take inventory and explore what their body is telling them and responding from that place versus the reactive place. We also want to gain awareness as to how our bodies are responding to difficult emotions in general. How does your body respond to fear, sadness, anger, jealousy, guilt? How does your body respond to being excited? Those kinds of things, okay? So the cards can be used individually, so you can use them by yourself. They are general enough, easy enough to be used by yourself. They can also be used in conjunction with your therapist. So you can take it to your therapist, or your therapist can purchase them and use them in session with particular clients as just a part of their practice. You can use them in conjunction with tarot cards. If that's your practice, you can use them in conjunction with affirmation cards. You can do them with astrology readings. I've seen people pair them with, when they're understanding their charts, they'll pull a card and the card is right on target for what their chart is saying, or what their chakras or energy readings. So you can pair them depending on your beliefs, depending on your practices. You can pair them with different modalities of healing for yourself. Clinicians and educators can bring them into the classroom to have group discussions. You can have your students, or whether they're youth or whether they are adults, you can have them talk about a particular card. You can address one a week. You can assign it for a homework assignment, or you can say, hey, I bought this deck, take it to your therapist. Can we pull cards from here every now and then to help me dive deeper? Because I sometimes get stuck. I don't always have the language of what to say. I don't always know that there are things that I need to talk about, but I found that when I pull these cards, I'm jolted into kind of thinking about things a little bit deeper that I may not have been on the forefront of my mind. Also, non-clinical and non-educational staff can use them. So if you're working in a setting where you're working as an aide, or you're working as an assistant, or you're working as an advocate or something like that, and you're just on staff, supporting the clinical staff. You can also use these as well. Organizations can use these cards to facilitate work retreats. We can have discussions that will create, discussion around job satisfaction. You can take these to help with bonding, to help with team building. You can help with training. You can do this as a part of onboarding for icebreakers, that kind of thing. Couples, groups, and people who are working in pairs or functioning in pairs can use them too. They can facilitate closeness, bonding, conversations that we didn't know we need to have. I use them honestly with my partner and we pull them. I remember in 2020 when we actually tried to work through several of the cards together, and we were like, you know what? We just gonna put this up. We just gonna put it up. And from that place is where one of the best practices came around, doing one card a week. And we'll talk about more of the best practices, because it is so much that comes to surface. It is so much that people can talk about, and it can actually get to a place where you're feeling like, whew, this is a lot. I need to take a break. And they can be used as conversation starters and to facilitate deep dives with folks. So I know that we've been talking about your relationship. I know that we've been talking about ways that you can manage your emotions inside of your relationship. Let's take a deeper look at the things that are coming up for you. And let's talk about where that may be coming from, the origin of it, and how we can start to change those, and how I can support you in our work together in changing those. You can also ask in relationship, let me further understand where you're coming from, what your life story is. I encourage people to use it when dating, when you're kind of like knowing that you are in a path of dating somebody that could be exclusive, that you use these for conversation starters as well, to help understand, like, are we in alignment? Do we have the same values? Helping you kind of gain more information about a person than regular sort of app dating things go. Okay, so using the cards is general. The cards were created to center Black folks, to center Black women, Black men, Black teens, and the cards are general enough to be used with anybody. I wanted to, on purpose and with great intention, to make sure that Black folks had representation. I wanted to make sure that Black women had something where they could see themselves. I wanted to make sure that Black men had a resource where they could see themselves, and I wanted to make sure Black teens had the same resource. So this is the first deck of the cards. This is the women's deck. And I wanted to make sure that I put a Black woman on there that was representative of a Black woman who we would see, right? And so each particular category of the card has a different representation of Black women. This is the mindset card, which has a Black woman here. This is a habit card, Black woman representation. And then this is the trigger card, Black woman representation. And you'll find that throughout all of the variations of the decks. These are the teen decks, and I specifically wanted to create a deck for teens that had teen images, because Black girls are oftentimes adultified to look older or treated older than what they are. And I wanted a resource where Black teens could be Black teens, and where kids could be kids without being overly adultified and made to be more mature than what they are. So we made sure that we got representation there. And I also wanted to have a deck for Black men where they were able to see themselves in a resource where in a space too, where it's often difficult for men to tap into their emotions because of stigma, because of social norms, because of gender roles, that kind of thing. So I wanted to create a deck where they could see themselves represented, instead of saying, hey, just go get the women's deck or just get the teens deck. I wanted to make sure that there was representation throughout. So while the cards are general enough, I do encourage people to use caution and discretion when using the cards with people who are actively suicidal, because at that moment, we need to get people stabilized and we need to get them care, and that's not the purpose of the cards. If you're working with somebody and you know that y'all have been working on forgiveness, because that's one of the cards in the mindset category, you might be able to ask them, are you feeling this way because you feel completely guilty, that kind of thing, as you're doing your assessment. And then you can say, remember, we talked about that forgiveness thing. You can bring it up then, but I asked you to use your clinical discretion and not just use them as a means to get people stability. That's not what it's for. But if you have an active relationship where the people have been introduced to the cards, that may be okay. But just in general, to get somebody stabilized, that's not the purpose. Or when a person is experiencing active psychosis, or in a stage where they may be experiencing delusions or hallucinations, or having sort of a dissociation from their body based on a trauma, from a trauma response, that's not the time to use the cards. The main goal is to get people stable. The cards have been created for people 12 years and older. The team deck is created for people from the ages of 12 to 19. The women's deck has been created for adults who are, depending on maturity level, 18 and up, okay? We might have some 18 and 19-year-olds who still might benefit from the team deck, and that's completely okay. We want to take people from where they are. And of course, the men's deck is 18 and up. So we want to make sure that we're using the cards in an appropriate manner. Because the team deck is included with people who are 12 years older in mind, I would not suggest using the cards with people who are younger, like 6, 5, because I just have not created the cards with those people in mind. I have found that some parents have picked, parents and counselors have picked cards from the deck that they felt like was helpful for a person younger than 12, but I wouldn't say the entire deck is. So there's an emotion wheel that comes in each one of the decks that looks like this. And people have found it helpful to actually use that card with people younger than 12 to help them learn emotional intelligence and begin to identify emotions that are difficult. So you'll see this card that has emojis on them because this speaks more to that generation's language and helps people to be able to identify based on facial expression. So in that case, I would say that's okay. But as far as asking a 5-year-old what happens when you feel ashamed, I don't particularly agree with that from a clinical level if I don't have a relationship with that child. Or asking them questions like, what makes you feel insecure? Depending on the child's maturity level or relationship that you have with the child, you may be able to ask such questions, but I would use discretion and maybe talk to the parents and guardians about introducing this resource. These cards are not meant to make people do anything. Just like therapy, we can't make people engage in therapy. These cards can't force anybody to heal or force anybody to be open to healing. So the cards, the purpose of the cards is not to force anybody to do anything. So if somebody has stated, I don't want to do that, I'm not interested, we don't force the cards on them. Just like we don't force therapy on them. So we can use the cards though with people who are willing to change, willing to engage, want to understand more about themselves, people who want to gain more insight. I love the cards as a source, as a resource to help other therapists learn language. Just because we're therapists doesn't mean we know everything there is to know. And sometimes we are constantly needing to learn new language, constantly needing to figure out, I didn't ask that question that way, or how would you ask this question? So it's basically also like a consultation tool for other therapists. How do I ask more questions that could get people into a deeper conversation? How can clients pick up language that could help them express what they're experiencing or express their emotions? Coaches in online programs use them. They can be used as classroom group exercises. You can use them again in conjunction with affirmations and intentions. One of the things I loved about 2020 was all the people who started to use them for girls' nights, virtual meetups, guys' retreats, barbershop conversations, salon conversations, had a number of stylists buy them to put them in their salon so that they can have conversations. Because, I grew up in a salon and that's where I learned all of the business of the adults. And I share with my hairstylist too. It just feels natural. Like somebody's doing your hair, it's a very intimate space. So you tend to kind of spill a little bit more. And so it's a great place to have these deeper conversations, especially in barbershop settings where guys are confiding in each other and having these intimate moments where they're able to talk more about what they're experiencing, and also icebreakers and team building. Lizette says, I am always looking to grow. How I connect the clients and the cards will be a great addition to my toolbox. Yes, thank you, Lynette, for saying that. I really do think that it's a thing that we can use just like any other tool. We have, questions you can ask to get at cognitions, to get at behaviors. This is another tool as well. And so I want to break down what's actually in the card deck. So the card deck comes with instructions, just like any other card deck. And so the instructions kind of introduces people to the resource. It says, hey, these cards are used for such and such. Welcome. Thank you so much for choosing to purchase this resource and put this as a part of your everyday sort of learning and healing and understanding about yourself. In all of the teachings that I do, even when I'm on live, even when I'm doing a webinar, I love, if I'm going to introduce a term, I love to make sure that we all have the same definition of the term. Because how many of you have been in conversation with folks and you're like, wait, We are not on the same page. We have a different definition. We were talking about two totally different things, right? So the card deck includes a glossary, and each one of them does so. Each one of the decks includes a glossary of terms that are not as common that we may think. So on here, we define shame, we define self-care, we define narrative, because just because I know what narrative means doesn't know somebody else knows what narrative means. I define reinforce, we define what it means to project, we define guilt, we define what we mean by ineffective versus effective. And also there's a scale on one of the cards, and this glossary tells what those numbers on the scale mean. So it's helping people to understand just like what they're going to be exposed to. Like I said, there's an emotion wheel, and there's also a resource card, of course, that has 911, suicide hotline, and there's a QR code that people can scan to go to more videos, and I'll take you there now. So if you can see my screen, this is what it would look like. Let's see. There we go. So when people scan this QR code with their phone, if they have a phone that has that ability, what they'll be taken to is this page that has other resources for them. So there's a download for effective tips for self-care, if people are struggling to kind of figure out what they can do. And there's a video on how to use the cards. Even though there's explanation inside of the instruction, there's a video that will take people to how to use the cards. Also, it'll take people to how to use the teen cards, because one of the questions is, well, how is the adult deck different than the teen deck? And it will help explain that. I also did a video of best practices from a workshop that I did that will take people through what are some things that you can do to make sure that you are engaging in best practices around the cards. And then here are some directories where people can find, and y'all will get this in y'all's guide that y'all will get tomorrow or at the end of this particular series, where there are directories where you can find therapists for yourself or for your clients. If people are looking for a therapist in their area, you can click on these and they'll take you to that site's directory. Also, suicide hotline, and we are constantly updating this glossary of terms with the glossary items that are in each deck. So the ones that I just named that was in the women's deck is here, and we've added some from the teen, and we've added those from the men's deck. And people can go here to figure out if they lose the card or if they want to share it with somebody. Hey, here's what these terms mean, just so you can get an understanding. And if people ever have any questions about how to use the cards or come across the issue, they can actually contact me. So that is what you get when you go to the resource card. Okay. In the deck, there's also the mindset category, the habit category, and the trigger category. In the women's deck, there are 12 cards, and there are 3 blank cards per category. And let me know if this should have taken y'all back to the screen so you can see it. Let me know if not. The blank cards serve as note cards that you can write your own questions, or you can assign them as between session assignments for clients to come up with their own questions. Because this was the first deck, we included the blank cards in there, but in the teen deck, there's only 1 blank card per category. And in the men's deck, there are no blank cards. Particularly because as therapists, we typically have other questions that we want to ask our clients, and we can put this here. We'll say, well, what did you think is a good question you want somebody to ask you about your thoughts? What is a question you want somebody to ask you about your beliefs? And so they can put this here, or you can say, here's a question that I like, that I ask all of my clients, because I know I got all Dr. Ebony's questions, but here's the question that I like to ask clients that I know is effective, and I'm going to put them on these cards as well. So that's what that's for. And it's also helpful for people to take notes on these cards as well, based on a particular card that stood out to them or one that they feel like they keep going back to. Okay. Any questions about any of that so far? Each of the categories in the women's deck is going to be structured just like that. So in the teen deck, you have 14 cards, and in the men's deck, you have 15 content cards, 12 content cards in women, 14 in the teen, and then 15 in the men. That's how many cards are going to come, and people are having questions about how many cards are in the deck. One of the things that I encourage people to do as a best practice is, because these are cards that are kind of like going to be something that gets you to think a little bit deeper, I encourage people to work through the cards once per week. If you think about the number of weeks that we have in the year, If you work on one card per week, then you have enough cards to take you throughout the entire year. If you're working on one card, that's literally, if you are purchasing the cards at like $49.97 is what the price is, you're paying less than $1 a week to engage in some deeper work where you could help learn some things about yourself. The cards also serve as a great entry point to people understanding what it's like to talk to a therapist or what questions a therapist may ask. Okay. And so people could get the deck and they may say, oh, okay, I didn't really think this was a question that therapists would ask. That's interesting. I thought it was going to be scarier than that. So this is what the cards look like. This is your mindset category. So the cards have, each of the cards, no matter which deck you pull from, has a prompt at the top and a quote or a task at the bottom. I love the task because a lot of times people say, okay, now what do I do with that information that I just discovered? Okay, so now I know I have an issue with forgiveness, or I know I'm still stuck in this area. What am I supposed to do now? So for each of the cards that you'll get or you'll pull to ask yourself or the people you're working with, these particular questions will have what they can do at the end, or they'll have a quote that they can reflect on. And so as a provider, you can tell clients, reflect on this quote and see what comes up for you, or journal. So even though on this, what do you need to forgive yourself for card, even though there's not a task to journal, you can assign whatever task you want them to do. Let's talk about that more. Let's think about over the next week or so, why you've been holding on to this issue. What is it that's coming up for you? What do you believe about yourself that you know isn't true? Journal about it. What is it that you keep telling yourself, even though you know it's not true? So these are how the cards look, and they're going to look the same way and have the same format across each category. Okay. Now, each of the cards, when they first came out, it was just supposed to be a women's deck. But because there was such a great need, people wanted journals, people wanted more editions of the cards. Also, the main question that came up too for folks is, where do I start? How am I supposed to know how to use the cards? So in true psychologist fashion, I included a scale at the beginning of the journal for women. So this is going to be your women's journal. The team journal looks just like this, but it has this particular cover on it. Okay, same content, just different cover, different color. So when people first get the cards, if they have the journal, and keep in mind, you have to have the cards in order to work through the journal. It's not a standalone journal. So the question, if you just get the journal, it won't make sense because it asks questions, as you can see on the other page, related to the card. So we'll go there. And Erica is saying, you'll get a deck of cards and a journal for your agency. So when you're working with clients, and you can also make copies of this to get out to people, you'll come to and you'll see that I actually worked through the scale myself already. What people will do is answer these questions. These are mindset items. These are habit items. These are trigger items. Based on what you are answering, you will calculate a total for each of those categories. The category with the highest total is where you would start. And I explained this in the best practices video. And you'll have this video recorded so you can refer back to it. But if you see here, I have a 14 for mindset. I have a score of 8 for habits, and I have a score of 11 for triggers. So the place that I would start would be mindset, because that's the thing that is generating more of the thoughts about myself. Like, I'm critical of myself. I hold on to grudges. I overthink most things. I have a hard time making decisions. So I would start there. Another place for people to start that I talk about is a red light, green light, yellow light method. Go through all the cards and sort them out depending on what card hits you in your chest. And you're like, whoo, I'm not answering that. Like, that even gave me pause. That's going to go in your red light category. You're going to go through and you're going to find another card. Like, oh, that's kind of hard, but I can do it if I sat down and did it. That's going to go in your yellow light. Your green light category is going to be those cards that are like, oh, okay, I just answered this right now as I read it. Like, what gets in the way of you putting yourself first? I don't know how to tell people no. That's a green light card. Okay. You will start working on the areas that are easiest as well. Some people will use this scale to figure out where to start. Another place, if people are still confused by the scale or don't have the journal, is to start with your green light cards, no matter the category. When we start with our green light cards, those cards that are easier, we create more of a likelihood that we're going to return to the cards. If we start with the red light card and we're like, what do you need to forgive yourself for? And I know I keep beating myself up about something that happened, I'm probably not ever going to come back to these cards, because every time I think about coming back to the cards, I'm filled with anxiety and I'm overwhelmed. So I'm going to start with the lowest hanging fruit so that I can increase my chances that I'm going to return to the cards, and so that I can also see myself create, like I see myself doing the work and creating motivation for myself. We can do this with our clients too. Part of decolonizing therapy, as we think about it, is taking clients for where they are, not what the protocol tells us to do. Okay. If a client says, I can't think about that right now, then what can you think about? What is it that you want to do that could still be helpful in your progression towards your goals? We want to start there. So if a client is saying, Dr. Ebony, I do not want to talk about forgiveness right now. Okay, here's a green light category. Where can we start? Let's start with the card that asks, what thoughts have helped you get through tough times? Okay, that feels less threatening. I'm less activated, I'm less triggered, and I can actually sit with that and think about that. So that's where we're going to start. Once a person sees that they can do the work, they're not as apprehensive or skeptical about the work to come. It's like, oh, we got through the green. I never thought I would get through all of those cards. Let's move on to the yellow cards. Okay, we got through that. Let's move on to the red light cards. And that'll probably take us through so many sessions and so much work. If you're working in brief interventions with folks, you can still use these cards in the same way. So working in short stints with folks where people are only seeing you for a short number of sessions, you can ask them what feels most helpful out of these categories that you want to target to help you progress towards your goals. The goal that we've set for you now, let's come up with the cards that we can address. We know we won't get through all of them, but let's pick the most important ones for you. So that's a way to start there. When you're getting the journal is also separated into mindset, habits, triggers to go along with the cards. And you will see here, this is what the journal page looks like. You will take the card of the week, say that your card is, what do you need to forgive yourself for? You would put that question in the card of the week. You would jot down your initial reactions and thoughts to it. And you would think about, what am I afraid of? Because when we can call attention to and name those things that serve as barriers for us, we can see them in black and white and get them out of our head, then we can actually begin to make decisions around, well, how do I want to address these fears? What do I want to do about them? Are they really fears in ways that I see them? And then we can think about, what do I want this card to help me address? Yes, Tony, the cards can be used in group sessions as well. So as I'm talking, all these cards can be used in individual or group, and you can have the group complete these journal entries as well. Once the card has been thought about, people have sat with it, you come back to this next page in the journal and you say, based on what I've learned about myself, here are the changes that I need to make. Here are the things that I want to highlight. And here's how I'm going to do it. So this page is all about empowerment moving forward. What are the things that we can do that we can put into action, which is really good when we're working with clients for a short period of time. It's goal-oriented, gets them to think about, what do I need to do? How do I need to do it? Here are the steps that I'm going to take to get there. Also, we can bring in values work too. On my website, I actually have a values assessment that people can download. If you go to drebony.com, and I'll put it in the chat, drebony.com/links, you'll actually see a values guide that is free to download. And you can start doing values work with your clients as well. And you can say, hey, what particular value of yours is this card related to? I know you said these are going to be your goals. Is this in alignment with your values? And so you help to build some consistency, some succinctness around the work that you're doing with the client. This other page is processing space. Each page of processing space in the journals comes with a quote at the top of the page just to motivate and encourage people as they do the work. Okay. Oh, Tony says she downloaded it. Thank you, Tony. I appreciate that. And so that's the women's journal. We also have a gender neutral journal that was created from when the men's deck was created. for folks who may not want the cute spirals, the rose gold spirals, but people who want something that's more leather bound and durable, okay? And so these questions are kind of alike, but very different. You get to create the week that you're working on, and you get to say what week this is. You get to kind of mark that like a journal entry. And you're going to start out noting your reflections and your insights. Reflect on one of the cards, journal your thoughts here. What does your future self need to know about the work that you're doing now? What would change for your family, for yourself, for your relationship, if you were to really do this work and change? If you really were to forgive yourself for the thing that you're holding on to, what would that look like? So it invites people to think beyond today, beyond the past, and start envisioning for themselves what their lives could look like without the fear, without the thing that's holding them back. Because if we can envision it, then we can move towards creating it for ourselves. Then the next one, in true scale fashion, because I love a scale, is how ready are you though to make that change? And I love this question because it's such an honest moment for ourselves and for our clients. People can envision it for themselves. People can want these things, but they may not be ready to make the change. And so it helps with a lot of frustration in session when we're asking people, I know you want to do that, but how ready are you? And from that question generates more work. So if somebody says I'm a 4, the next question is, what would need to happen in order to move you up to a 5? Not move you up to a 10, but to move you up a notch. What is keeping you at a 4? What is keeping you at a 4 versus a 3? What is going well for you? What is the thing that gets in your way that makes this change something that couldn't happen at the next level? Well, I'm scared that if I change, the people are going to leave. If I no longer do what people say, who am I going to have around me? I won't have any friends. That's very, very valid for a lot of people. Or I'm scared if I change, I won't have money to take care of myself if I leave this job. Or if I start speaking up for myself, I'm scared that I may make somebody upset with me. Conversations that we can have based on this particular scale. Also, once a person says, here's where I am, what goals? So yesterday, for the people who missed, we talked about a scale. We talked about this scale. Where's your baseline self? Based on the change level that you are for 4, what are the goals that your 4 self can make to continue to move yourself up a notch? Not to a 10, because I know we're highly aspirational folks. We have the same aspirations for our clients, but what can move you up a notch? And you will put those in that box. Now let's implement. What's one thing you can do this week to move you closer? Again, great for brief interventions where you're goal oriented and you can get people towards taking action so they can actually see themselves do the things that they've been afraid of and gain that motivation and trust in themselves. And then you're going to use this other page to process and reflect. Okay, so let's take a look at what are some follow-up questions, and you're going to get this, right? So if you're a person who is stuck on like, what do I ask? I don't really know. I want to pull this up so you can see it. I don't really know how to ask follow-up questions. Here is something that we could actually do. So you're going to get this guide and we'll dive more into it tomorrow. This guide is going to tell you questions that you can ask to introduce the cards. It's also going to give you follow-up questions for every single card in the women's deck. Okay. And you're going to be able to use this link here to refer back to the resource page that we had. So I wanted to show you this because we're going to do a deeper dive in it tomorrow, but I provide a space for us to, how do I actually ask the question? How do I introduce the deck to the people I'm working with? How do I ask the follow-up questions? Because I might myself might get stuck and I want to know how I work through that. Okay. And so let me stop sharing this and go back to the presentation. Okay. I don't know why that's the page, but we'll figure it out because that's not what's showing up here. Let me go to, okay, here we go. Okay, there we go. Okay. So let's do a question. And I know we have 10 minutes, so I want to do a couple of these mindset questions to see what comes up in you and to see, so you can know what your clients are experiencing. So I pulled some cards that I want you to either ask yourself or jot down how you would present this to a person that you're working with. Bring a person to mind or think about it for yourself. How would this feel working with this person? Okay. So the first card is, and you can put up in the chat if you feel safe, what your answer is. What negative judgments do you have about yourself right now is a mindset card. What negative judgments do you have about yourself right now? And I'm going to bring back up the journal pages so you can actually write down. And this is going to be your also, so if you want to put it up now, you can, but this is also going to be your take home work. What are your initial thoughts about that question? What fears and anticipation do you have about that question? How could this card help you if you were to address the judgments that you have about yourself? Based on what you've learned, what changes do you need to make as it relates to the judgments that you have about yourself, and what could those action steps look like? And then you're going to talk about all the other thoughts that came up for you. And you can choose this card or you can choose one of the other cards that I pulled. But this first one is, what negative judgments do you have about yourself right now? Maybe it's, I can't think like this, or my clients are not going to like this, or I don't know how to present it. It could be whatever. Or I have a meeting coming up, I have to present. I'm not going to do well because I've taken time out to attend this webinar. Anything that comes up, or I don't know what to cook tonight. People are going to be mad at me, whatever judgments that you have about yourself. Okay. Yes. The task that is associated with this card is a self-compassion task. And I really want you to do this when you go home, or do it when you have time. One of the things that we can do to combat judgments that we have is to generate self-compassion. And if you were here yesterday, we talked a lot about a lot of the emotional things that we are experiencing, a lot of the criticism, a lot of the anxiety, a lot of the worry. Love this card for this task. So to generate self-compassion, what I want you to do is get a picture of yourself as a child and ask yourself, one, would I say these things to myself here? And two, what things do I want to say to him instead? That's a self-compassion generation task. One of the things that we do is we hold our adult selves to so much scrutiny and criticism, to so many expectations and standards that we would not hold our child selves to. Not because of ability level, but just because we have in our minds that our adult selves should somehow know better or don't deserve the compassion that we give out to children. So I want you to do this. Take a picture of yourself. What would you say to that child? And what are the other things that you could say that are not the judgments that you have now that could help you gain more compassion for yourself? Thank you for putting that up. And see what that does for the judgments. Does it loosen it? Do you think it's a bunch of BS? And you can do this with your clients. You can have them bring a picture in of themselves and ask them, what were you experiencing at this time? How much compassion did you have for yourself? Do you have that same compassion for your adult self? Okay. The other one is the scale card I wanted to introduce. On a scale of 0 to 10, based on the changes that you said you want to make in your life, say a client comes in, so you want to change, you want to make these changes. Okay. On a scale of 0 to 10, how much do you trust yourself to create the change that you want? 10 being I trust myself completely, 0 being I don't trust myself at all. And you're going to get a list of follow-up questions that you can ask to go with it. Right? And we all do that. Like, I know I would not say these things to myself as a kid. I know that. So why am I saying it now? What makes it okay for me to say it to my adult self? And it's usually those things that we tell ourselves, like, I should know better. Those things. So I need more compassion for myself. So on a scale of 0 to 10, how much do you trust yourself to create the change that you want? Make a list of what is getting in the way of you being unable to trust yourself. From those two cards, I want you to do the work. You're not going to share this next time. You're not going to share this next time. This is for you. Okay. And you can either go try it out today. Say you have a meeting with somebody today. You can say, hey, I want to see how these questions really go. I'm going to ask somebody, what do you need to forgive yourself for? Or how much do you trust yourself to create the change that you want? Let's talk about what's getting in the way. That's a whole session. What's getting in the way? Why is that getting in the way? Who told you that you couldn't do that? Thank you, Lizette. Right? What has gotten in the way? What disrupted your ability to trust yourself? And that's a question we need to ask ourselves too. What has happened that made you doubt yourself or made you not trust yourself? It could be a bad past relationship. It could be a failed friendship. It could be a failed job. It could be a rejection from a job. It could be any of those things. So you start to doubt and trust your judgment. Okay. Any questions? As you gather your questions, the habit category that we're going to be going in tomorrow is going to be really us taking inventory of the behavioral things that we're doing. So I want you to come to session tomorrow if you're going to join us back here tomorrow. And I want each person to bring a habit that you keep doing that's minor. And I want to talk about that using the cards. That's your take-home preparation for the habit card. What is something you keep doing that you know is causing problems for you? Watching 2020 and trying to go to sleep at night. Watching true crime shows and wondering why I'm worried about everybody's safety, right? My question. So we're going to work through the cards based on that one thing. Bring it. You don't have to share it with the group, but bring it so that you can use that question as a frame of reference as we're going through the habit cards, okay? Or pressing snooze and now I'm running around the house scrambling to get to an appointment. Or, not setting an alarm and getting up or drinking too much coffee or drinking too much caffeine that's furthering my anxiety, right? That's me, right? I love true crime and I'm wondering why my anxiety is through the roof about people's safety. So what do I need to do? What is that about that's kind of intriguing me, right? So that's what we're going to pick up on tomorrow. And I'm happy to answer any questions. I did include here some references that you will get that you can go retrieve the articles, read the articles about the data that I shared at the very beginning. Okay. And you're also going to be able to connect with me through these methods, drebony.com. You can find out more information on mytherapycards.com about the cards. You can share them with folks. Email me if you have any questions, or if you just want to chat and hang out on social media, that's where I am. I'm at Dr. Ebony Online. There's a directory that I want to share too, that you will get in your guide tomorrow. That's going to help you come up with questions for each of the follow-up questions for each of the categories, but also directories for how you and your clients can find therapists in case clients are needed therapists. That's therapyforblackgirls.com, that's inclusivetherapist.com, and psychologytoday.com. Those are directories where you can find providers in your area, and you can narrow it down to zip code and also specialty. So you'll get those as well. Does anybody have any questions before we close out? I know we have 1 minute. Any questions? Okay, I'll turn it back over to you, Erica, if nobody has any questions. Has my video been off this whole time?
Not the whole time, just okay. When you came back from Tampa.
Okay, it turned it off. Okay.
Yeah. So thank you everybody for joining. Hopefully we will see you all back here tomorrow, same time. Again, I will send out a reminder and the link so that you all have that at your disposal. You can just pull it out of your email. And yeah, I'll see you all back here tomorrow.
Thank y'all so much.
Thanks everybody for joining. Tashi, Lakota, Tony, Lizette, Nora, Virginia, I miss you. How have you been?
Thank y'all. You're welcome.
Hey. Hi. How are you?
I miss you.
I was kind of sitting in the backdrop because I started. I was having lunch. I didn't want people seeing me eat. So.
Yeah.
Anyway, and I heard a little bit. You were on NC Van. this week? Did you?
Uh-huh. Yeah,
Yeah,
I did
yeah.
that training this week.
Stephanie is taking the certification course, and I heard your
Oh, okay.
voice. I said, "That's
Oh, okay.
Erica."
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's me.
But nice to meet you, Dr. Ebony. Thank you
Nice
so
to meet you
much.
too, Virginia. You're so welcome.
All righty. Bye-bye, y'all.
All right. See you later.
Do you want me to stop the recording or you want to stop?